Good morning and welcome to our Sunday presentation. United Lodge of Theosophists, Washington, D.C. meets every Sunday at 11 a.m. for the discussion of a particular topic. Today's presentation will be on the Earth chain, and next week the topic will be Theosophical symbolism. Please also note that we meet every first and third Sunday of the month to read and discuss selected Theosophical writings. We're currently having roundtable discussions on the ocean of Theosophy. United Lodge of Theosophists is guided by its declaration, which states the following. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy, without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy, and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading comes from the Bhagavad Gita. Men being contented and devoted to their own proper duties attain perfection. Hear now how that perfection is attained by devotion to natural duty. If a man maketh offering to the Supreme Being, who is the source of the works of all, and by whom this universe was spread abroad, he thus obtaineth perfection. The performance of the duties of a man's own particular calling, although devoid of excellence, is better than doing the duty of another, however well performed. And he who fulfills the duties obligated by nature does not incur sin. A man's own natural duty, even though stained with faults, ought not to be abandoned. For all human acts are involved in faults, as the fire is wrapped in smoke. The highest perfection of freedom from action is attained through renunciation by him who, in all works, has an unfettered mind and subdued heart. Learn from me in brief in what manner the man who has reached perfection attains to the Supreme Spirit, which is the end, the aim, and highest condition of spiritual knowledge. Imbued with pure discrimination, restraining himself with resolution, having rejected the charms of sound and other objects of the senses, and casting off attachment and dislike, dwelling in secluded places, eating little, with speech, body, and mind controlled, engaging in constant meditation, and unwaveringly fixed in dispassion, abandoning egotism, arrogance, violence, vanity, desire, anger, pride, and possession, with calmness ever present, a man is fitted to be the Supreme Being. And having thus attained to the Supreme, he is serene, sorrowing no more, and no more desiring. But alike towards all creatures, he attains to supreme devotion to me. By this devotion to me, he knoweth fundamentally who and what I am, and having thus discovered me, he enters into me without any intermediate condition. And even the man who is always engaged in action shall attain by my favor to the eternal, and incorruptible, imperishable abode, if he puts his trust in me alone. With thy heart place all thy works on me, prefer me to all else, exercise mental devotion continually, and think constantly of me. By so doing, thou shalt by my divine favor surmount every difficulty which surroundeth thee. But if from pride thou wilt not listen to my words, thou shalt undoubtedly be lost. And if, indulging self-confidence, thou sayest, I will not fight, such a determination will prove itself vain. For the principles of thy nature will impel thee to engage. Being bound by all past karma to thy natural duties, thou, O son of Kunti, will involuntarily do from necessity that which in thy folly thou wouldst not do. There dwelleth in the heart of every creature, O Arjuna, the Master, Ishvara, who by his magic power causeth all things and creatures to revolve, mounted upon the universal wheel of time. Take sanctuary with him alone, O son of Bharata, with all thy soul. By his grace thou shalt obtain supreme happiness, the eternal place. And now for today's talk.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. This subject people find difficult to understand, and Mr. Judge has a writing in the Ocean where he explains that because of the materialistic thinking of today, it is extremely difficult to understand the philosophy by looking at these charts, because these are on a surface, whereas when if we were to actually see it, we would see a ball in the sky, just like you see the moon, for instance. But then if your inner eye is open, you would be able to perceive all these different inner layers. They're all in one mass. They're not separate from one another. So when you look at these, please remember that these are not separate from one another. She explains it this way so that we can understand what she's trying to tell us, but it does not exist in reality this way. Now, in the Secret Doctrine on page 200, you see this chart here. And she tells us that these three planes she does not touch upon, because at this time in our developmental stage, she says these three levels or planes are non-existent to the human mind. She's only talking about these four. And as you can see, the earth is down here, and it is the most solid. Right here. This is earth, and 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have these three, and she tells us that we have not passed the middle point of the fourth, and we're circling round towards the spirituality. This part is coming into substance. We have to do it. It's necessary. This is the most solid, but when we are going backwards, these are etherealized again. She calls it in the Secret Doctrine the spiritualized. Whatever that means, we're not going to be as solid as we are here on the fourth plane. Now, we only see Moon and the other planets because they're all fourth plane globes. Every planet in the solar system has 7 different constituent layers, just like Earth does. But because our consciousness is here, we do not perceive the rest. This is the planetary depiction of the Earth. we're not talking about the solar system today because that is a different subject altogether. We're talking about the Earth as a mass containing all these 7 within itself. And as you can see, this is the archetypal world. But what she means by that is that it is a world that comes into being, but it's going to be improved upon as we go along. Because remember, we have millions and millions of years that we're spending on Earth. We just cannot accept the modern numbers that people come up with. We have to go with the Gupta Vidya, which is the system in the ocean that Mr. Judge adopted, and it's applicable to this diagram here as well. So then we have the intellectual or the creative, and here substantial or formative world. Now, we, as I just mentioned, we only see the other 4th plane globes in the sky, the ones that are visible. She does not explain in the Secret Doctrine as to what is going to happen at the end of our Earth life here when we move to E. Now, Mr. Judge explains that in order to move from D to E, all of the units that are composing humanity at this time has to reach to its highest expression of itself. But at the same time, he tells us, we are bringing all of the other constituent parts to its highest level of expression as well. And he finishes the chapter by saying, I am talking about educating the elementals, in other words, the atoms. Atoms. Remember what HPB told us? These are psycho-spiritual. They are not physical. So the problem science experiences with this philosophy is that when the eye can no longer follow the atom or its impression that it leaves, it means that the atom has moved to a different plane. It is not on this plane anymore. So they lose track as to what has happened to it and where it has gone, because the energy it exerts does not belong to this plane, but it might be one of the others, higher levels. So we have to keep all this in mind when we look at these. In the next diagram, this is the Zoroastrian philosophy. Zarathustra, I think, is the other name. Zoroaster being the Roman or Greek expression of it. So here we see the Mazdian Earth. It's exactly the same as this here, as it is depicted, the Earth, Kwaniratha, being the most solid here. Now, this represents the Earth, this is the Earth chain, this is the same Earth, but with different names attached to it. And here, we have the lunar chain. According to this philosophy, we were on the lunar chain first. In other words, the moon is the mother of the Earth. It is very old. It has now, we are told in the Secret Doctrine, has transferred all of its energy to Earth. But nevertheless, it follows it because it is attracted to it, having given a rise to it and given its energy to it. Nevertheless, it follows Earth until it is going to be totally dissipated. Now, when we look at the solar system, some of them don't have any moons. Others have more than one. This student looked everywhere, came only to one passage where she says, we have to remember that all these planetary bodies do not come into existence all at once. And now we will explain as to what that process is. When we are on this side, as you can see from the diagram, is the Earth chain, which came from the lunar chain. Let us define what one round is. In the olden days, they used different expressions for it, but one round means we have started our journey on globe A, then we went to B, then we went to C, then D, then E, F, G. This is the end of this round, and when we reach G, it means that we have circled around and experienced life on that level of consciousness on each of these globes, which is the companion globes of Earth, as one mass. They roll in space all in one mass. They're not separated from another. But when we're on one, we do not perceive the other. So one round is a circle around all of them. When we go from one plane to another, and we have done the 7 rounds on Earth, for instance, so we must not mix what we do on Earth as to this whole thing, which constitutes one round. Of Earth in one mass. We do that on Earth too, because the root races are not all expressing their perfectibility at the same time. At the beginning of the Manvantara, there are 7 root races that is placed on Earth. Those root races then have to do sub-races, and the sub-races have to do family races and so forth, in order to give its humanity time to develop, in other words, to learn what we need to learn. Master's explanation on this diagram here is that the Earth, all these globes of the Earth, are in coordination but not in consubstantiality. Small letter. Consubstantiality. Okay. And we have already kind of touched on it. Coordination is that they all roll in one mass, but consubstantiality means that their substance is not the same. So they each have a different mode of expression, and our consciousness then gets in line with it, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be on it, and that's the experience we have. In the circling, we go through it 7 times, obviously, for each root race and for all the rest. In this one, it is only expressing the 7th round, and we're going to read it from the Secret Doctrine as well after we explain the diagram. This is the lunar chain, our moon. And here the same pattern is visible. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. In the Secret Doctrine, it is stated that when we begin this journey, in the first round, the Pitar fathers incarnate as the first life wave, so that they can give the motion necessary to the substantial atoms and move them in the right direction, because there isn't anything on, say, on the earth at that time, because it comes about when the monads are in its center. HPV says without the monadic essence, no evolutionary process can take place. So the lunar fathers, the Pitar fathers, they're called in the secret doctrine. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have rounds where the mineral, the plants, botanicals, all have to develop to a certain extent that the animals can use, and then we come into it after the animals. In one of those rounds, the sequence changes. We come first before the animals, because our presence is necessary to evolve all the other kingdoms with our intelligence and assistance. Now, when we have reached the 7th round, the first evolutionary impulse that had come onto A moves to B. And then the following root races in their developmental stages follow one at a time. All humanity, in other words, do not come onto the same globe all at the same time. And when the experience on A has been completed by one, number one moves to B, and in this sequential order, we go through all of these globes. HPV tells us in the secret doctrine, because she wrote it, I'm just mentioning her name. It's not her substance. Came from the Master's Lodge. Remember that, please. She tells us that the 4th round is the most important one, because during the 4th round, on any globe, the humanity of that globe develops to its fullest extent. And because of the millions of years we spend on each one, she says that in the middle of this round, if the monadic essence has not reached to become a human being in this mantra, it will not do so, because the door has already closed. Humanity has reached the numbers that it can have in this mantra. From now on, we're developing towards a spirituality, because we're going to go back to home, so to speak, where we had come from, with all the gain that we have achieved in this. So our progress is this way, correct? We come in and we do all this experiencing life in different rounds, and we're going this way, but at the end we're going to have achieved this much, whatever it is that we have achieved. In other words, we don't end up at the same place we have come in. It is this way, and we end up at a higher place. Those units that do not reach humanity in this mantra will have to wait till it is finished, and in the next mantra they will be the first humanity of that particular mantra, because they will incarnate, and HPV tells us that they will be compensated for that waiting that they have done, because there isn't enough time if we haven't reached the human state at this 4th to be able to continue with our development. So in the 7th, A has finished its duty to its humanity. All of the units have gone through it, and now we come to B, and they have done it, and then we go to C. In the 7th round, what happens is during, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, during these rounds, the globes that have done their duty kind of fall asleep. But in the 7th, that is not applicable anymore because there will be no more development taking place on that globe. So this globe sends its energy out into the nebular constitution of our universe and finds a Laya center. Laya center is the scientific zero center. And it gives the impulse to that center to evolve, to become, to move on. And so transfers its energy and starts the earth chain, because this is called a chain in the secret doctrine. So A gives its energy to A plus. This is the earth chain, and it will continue with that process until its development is completed and it can support life, first elemental, then mineral, then plant, then animal. And this process goes on. So these globes are not all developed at the same time, as you can see. When B finishes its duty and it has now come to its end of life, it does exactly the same thing. It moves its energy to that Laya center, which is called B plus here, which is going to be the earth chain. So the earth chain comes about from here. That is why we cannot say that something comes from nothing, because it does not happen that way. The energy is moved to a Laya center, which gives that evolutionary impulse, and then it develops. And in this way, the earth chain developed for our occupation. In the ocean, it is given billions of years for the mineral and the plant life to develop. These are not small numbers of years, they're billions of years. I think Mr. Judd uses 2 billion to the first process, and then 1 to 2 billion for the next process. So we're talking about billions of years for the globe to develop itself to that degree where it will support life as we know it, in other words, organic life. So that is how it is brought about. Here it is. Someone removed it. Okay. So we're going to read a little bit from the Secret Doctrine to add to what has been explained. This is about that one. It's on page 250. It says here, this means that every new round develops one of the compound elements as now known to science, which rejects the primitive nomenclature, preferring to subdivide them into constituents. If nature is the ever becoming on the manifested plane, then those elements are to be regarded in the same light. They have to evolve, progress, and increase to the manvantaric end. Thus, the first round, we are taught, develop but one element, and in nature and humanity in what may be called one aspect of nature. In other words, one-dimensional space. The second round brought forth and developed two elements, fire and earth, and its humanity adapted to this condition of nature, if we can give the name humanity to beings living under conditions unknown to men, us. To use again a familiar phrase in a strictly figurative sense, a two-dimensional species. The process of natural development, which we are now considering, will at once elucidate and discredit the fashion of speculating on the attributes of the 2, 3, and 4 or more dimensional space, but in passing, it is worthwhile to point out the real significance of the sound but incomplete intuition that has prompted among the spiritualists and theosophists the several great men of science, for matter of that, the use of modern expression, the fourth dimension of space. Now, what does she tell us in the Secret Doctrine? We are now three-dimensional, are we not? Height, length, width, and depth. So, she's telling us that we don't all at once become three-dimensional, because our world at first is one-dimensional, then two-dimensional, and then it becomes three-dimensional. Now, how many elements do we have today? 5. We have the elements are divided into 5 in their general expression. She tells us earth, air, water, fire. And the 5th one that we're developing, she calls ether. This ether. This ether. This is not the ether of science, because the A is not there for that one. This ether is equivalent to Anima Mundi or Akasha in the Secret Doctrine, and it has 7 levels. The ether of science being its lowest level, which is most condensed or most materialistic, even though it is ethereal and you cannot see it. In the Secret Doctrine, there are hints that by the end of this round, the ether will be visible in the air. So that also tells us that humanity is going to be at a higher level than it is now, because unless all of the units develop, that will not be a reality for us. So the ether itself is going to be visible in the air. So that's the 5th. Mm-hmm. Now, we go to the other one, is 3/8. In the Zend Avestic Amshashpans, we're talking about the Vendidat, which is the book of the Parsis. Parsis being a very old Iranian root nation. Parsis. Parsis. We're told that there are 13 Zarathustras or Zoroasters. According to the chronology of the Master's Lodge, the first Zoroaster belongs to the fourth, which is the Atlantean race. And so imagine how old that nation is. These are the old Iranians. And the secret doctrine tells us that they were a very practical nation. Their life was built on purity. So this philosophy is this old, in other words. But according to the writings, the Parsi, there are only less than 1 million, like 850,000 Parsis left all over the world. You have to be born into it. They don't accept outsiders into their religion. So the one that wrote these writings for HPB's time or afterwards was a Parsi himself. Mr. Wadia was a Parsi, and he left quite a lot of writings because he knew it firsthand. But unfortunately today, the Parsis don't understand their own religion because they have lost the key and they only follow the traditional way of doing things, but they don't understand what it stands for. In the Fargard, Zarathustra is told by Ahura Mazda to invoke the Ameshaspenta, who rule over the 7 Kashwares of the earth. Those. Each one of these is a Kashwares of the earth. And the Kashwares in their 7 applications refer equally to the 7 spheres of our planetary chain, to the 7 planets of the solar system, the 7 heavens, etc., according to whether the sense is applied to a physical, supramundane, or simply a sidereal world. And in the bottom, footnote, the 7 Kashwares of the earth, the 7 spheres of our planetary chain, the 7 worlds also mentioned in the Rig Veda are fully referred to elsewhere. There are 6 Rajamsi worlds. She is comparing different old literature to show us that the root of this is the same. In other words, they all come from the wisdom of the ages, every one of them. Rajamsi are the worlds above Prithivi. Prithivi is the earth. Another name she is used in the writing is Bhumi. And this one is Prithivi. Which comes from the Parsi language. The earth. And then it says, or this either idam, I could not find this anywhere, idam, as opposed to that which is yonder. Idam is this earth, and the yonder are the 6 others. Idam or idam, I'm not sure. Couldn't find it. Idam, this earth. And the other one is opposed to that one, yonder. And you can see it follows the same pattern, and the north has two, then there is one in the east, where there is one in the west, south has two again. So even though they hid it, it's still, you can see that it's exactly the same thing from the names they give it and how they explain it. Well, there's a whole lot more, but you can please go to page 384, 385 of Secret Doctrine 2 and read it. And also there's a reference to Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, Atlantis, because as said, the first Zarathustra comes from Atlantean race, because the Atlanteans were extremely spiritual, but towards the end of it, they also divided into two halves, one going towards the spirituality, the other one totally absorbed in materiality. When we say wicked and sinful, it's a relative term. It's not in the Christian terminology term that they became really materialistic because it was a phase we had to go through, but they got so enmeshed into it that they were not able to free themselves from that clingingness, which we are also experiencing at this time. Our society, especially the West, is very materialistic. We need to understand that we are spiritual beings and adjust our adjust our lifestyle to what we want to express in it, not just materiality. Now, from there, we're going to this one here, which is also in volume 2. Let's see. Let me see what's on there. Okay, this is also Mazdian religion, which is that one we just explained. I think I'll just read this a little bit here. The Mazdian names given above, which is Worobashti, Worizarshti, Vidat Hafshu, Taradat Hafshu, Savahi, and Arzahi are the names given to those planetary bodies, which are the 7 levels or 7 planes of Earth. The Mazdian names given above have only to be replaced by those used in the Secret Doctrine to become an orthodox tenet. The Earth, our world, therefore, is tripartite because the chain of the worlds is situated on the 3 different planes above our globe. And you can see that. Here's the globe, and here's 1, 2, 3. So it is tripartite.
What page is that on?
This is on 759.
Volume 2, yeah?
2, volume 2, yeah. And it is septempartite because of the 7 globes or spheres which compose, showing the Kwaniratha alone is combined with Imat, this earth, and Avat, upper earth. So it's that scheme there. Now we're going to go to the other one. This is Mr. Judge. He says, we're now in physical bodies that is perfectly visible to us, and as the astral body is sometimes seen by certain persons, it follows most surely that some of those persons have the vehicles to see it with, as they are functioning in the material world of this earth. So, this is not a normal condition for the whole human race, he's telling us at this time, but it will be in the future. And knowing that we are reincarnating on earth repeatedly in company with others, we need to understand that what we do now is going to affect our incarnations later. So, in order to understand that we're spiritual beings, he is advising, well, recommending that we align ourselves internally with these schemes, because he says that you really cannot quite understand what it is just by looking at it and reading it, but you have to also perceive it within yourselves. And he says, these companion globes are only phases of the earth, but they're not phases of the physical earth, they are phases of consciousness. Consciousness. Oh my. Phases of consciousness. Well, I think we'll stop it here and open it out. I'm sorry, I went over. Okay, we'll answer your questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I was a little bit late, maybe you explained it at the beginning, so I'm sorry. So as I understand, like as you explained, once we as a humanity finish our evolution on one of those Earth companions, let's say A, yeah, we move on to B and A falls asleep. And then after we complete the whole cycle and we go to G, you said that G gives its impulse to another chain.
No.
Huh?
No. This occurs in a systematic fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have 7 rounds to go around these globes.
Mm-hmm.
We complete 6 rounds, and in between each one there's a rest period.
Mm-hmm.
But the globe remains as is, because others are going to come one after the other, because humanity does not transfer from the lunar chain all at once to the first globe. We come in sequential order. The first that comes are the Pitar fathers. Then the most developed comes, the second group is then the most developed and suitable to come to globe A, when the first stream moves on to B. And in that fashion, as each one moves further down, then another one comes and occupies A and B.
But what falls asleep? Because you mentioned something falls asleep, some
Yes.
globes.
In the 7th round, the scheme, I said, changes, because humanity has gained all of the improvement and levels of consciousness it's going to achieve during that period. And now the lunar chain is going to die one globe at a time. When, say, A, right here, this is A. We come A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay? When all of the life waves or units, however you want to say it, have finished their journey on A, the last one, the 7th, moves to B.
Mm-hmm.
And all the rest, of course, have moved up themselves. And then this A is going to die as a part of the lunar chain. And what it does is it transfers its energy to a Laya center and initiates another globe's formation for our occupation later on when it becomes fit. Okay, and then when when the seventh group finishes their life journey on B and they have moved to C, B dies and transfers its energy. But what needs to be remembered is that this is a diagram to explain the process. In actuality, they roll together in one mass. It's only our consciousness that is in sync with the consciousness and substance of that globe that enables us to perceive it. When we are on one of them, we don't perceive the other six. So when that journey of the lunar chain is finished on G, then the whole system has died. It has transferred all of its energy to the earth chain. And then this then works itself to develop necessary conditions for humanity to occupy, to continue their journey of growth, evolution.
This is how I understood it. Like I went after all the rounds, and then I guess the same will happen to the Earth chain. After 7 rounds, after our evolution is completed for all life waves, then the last planet G will give its impulse, to another chain.
Center.
And what happens to those glows which die or fall asleep?
Well,
do they disintegrate somehow?
They obviously die because it has given all of its energy. The moon that we see in the sky is a 4th plane globe, and all the other ones you see of the solar system belong to that 4th. So she tells us hints in the Secret Doctrine that the moon is a dead planet, but nevertheless, because it has transferred all of its energy to the earth, it's attracted to it. It vampirizes, she says, Earth.
Yeah, this is what I have heard from other sources.
It's in the Secret Doctrine. It vampirizes us. And it has a nefarious effect as well, because it's a dead planet. She says, when you go to a cemetery, you notice that the greenest grass is where the burial ground is. But she says the nefarious radiation that is emitted from there also kills. This is on Earth. The moon does exactly the same thing. It vampirizes, and if you are influenced by it, it will influence you. You have to keep your mind positive and attuned to the inner life so that the external things cannot affect you as much. Yes?
So in the chain of development, something needs to be prepared, some degree of whatever, it might not be solid like this, but something you call the earth has to be prepared for the first wave, to repeat our fathers, to exist on it, right?
What do you think the Pitar fathers are?
Well, there's...
Why are they called Pitar fathers? Because they have given us something.
Yeah.
But it's only in the 4th round that I wanted to read from the Secret Doctrine, which I can't find my page. Let me see.
Another time, don't stress
No,
out.
I think, let me see. I marked it. Okay, here it is on this one. Okay, we explained it, but briefly, that the Earth chain, when it is formulating, it's ethereal, is it not? It's not solidified. It only solidifies in D. This is as solid as we're going to get. Not only that, she says it's called Earth and also humanity because she says she has no other equivalent terms to express it. We are not really human because we're evoluting to become human, but what else is she going to call us? She says that in the middle of the 3rd round only are we solidified enough to divide into male and female. And during that period, our minds are also lighted by the Kumaras in the Secret Doctrine. So if you remember all that, the first 2 billion years, according to the ocean, Mr. Judge's ocean, the Earth A is developing itself. The plant, she says that even though we know plants and minerals and animals, he says that as we etherealize, especially in the 7th round, they're not going to look the same anymore. I mean, they're hinting that we're going to change. Yes?
So you were saying that in the 4th round is when we could develop into our fullest potential?
Correct.
And then you had mentioned about the monads. So are you saying if we do develop to our fullest potential, is that when the bridge is made from the personality to the monad?
Okay. The bridge exists between the 2 functions of the mind, and we talked about it. We said that only for comparative talk and understanding do we call the mind a higher and a lower, with a bridge in between the 2. But there is in reality only one mind. It depends how you use it. The explanation is that if you are charitable, generous, kind, loving towards others, your nature is in line with your higher self, because that is all that it knows how to do. Because in the core, Kamadeva, that gives rise to it, is love. Kamadeva. Kama is your passions and desires. We have made them personal to ourselves, but in the general scheme of the cosmos, there's nothing personal about it. It is impersonal, impartite, and unsectarian. In other words, it is selfless. So if you align yourself in that direction, then you're going with the higher mind, which you need to activate at this stage of our development. But the other one, the intellectual mind, HPV tells us in all of her writings, assumes the position of sum total.
So,
Sum total does not allow the other part to express itself. Why? Because we have materialized ourselves to such a degree, and who knows what we were doing in the previous life. You might have been awakened to this reality before, but obviously you moved somewhere else and you're now coming back.
So
Yes.
so basically what I've read about is that the monad could be what we would typically perceive as God, because it's the highest form that we can understand, basically, of the source.
In this writing, it's Buddhimanas. The highest does not, at this time, incarnate in us, Atman.
Atman is not.
Atman
Not
or
incarnate, but
Atman,
that you could
it shines from
link
above.
to, yeah.
It shines above,
Participate in it.
Right. Or experience or see
Yeah.
or feel even.
Buddhimanas is the monad.
Okay, shines from above, but it is not in.
Buddhimanas is the monad, but at death, when the lower sheaths drop, this light is shining above it, because you have now become an ethereal something that is your essence, and it pulls itself to Devakan. Those 3 go together. And in life, depending what you're doing, you're either attracting its light or you're deflecting it.
Right.
And that is the key for each human being. If you align yourself with your soul nature, you're pulling it up, manas, higher or lower. It's just relative terms that are
So
used.
that would be what
The lower is
HPV
your
talking
intellectual.
about the fullest expression.
Sorry?
Pulling it up is what HPV would talk about when we're reaching our fullest expression.
No. Pulling up means your mind is aligned with the higher aspects of your inner life, and it pulls everything up. Remembering that your body is an alchemical process, it changes the constituent parts to be more aligned with the higher aspect of your life, so that it does not become a impediment in your way. A lot of us have these impediments in trying to meditate because we have not aligned ourselves in that way. So the elementals are trained in a different way and they obstruct us from seeing the truth. So the slower is the intellectual mind. It's a necessary step that we have to go through, but it should not be given the sum total position, is what she's telling us. She's saying that. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
guess what I'm asking is then what's the fullest expression? How is that achieved? What does that look
Well,
like?
I think I gave you a meditative expression of it today.
Oh,
The
okay.
fullest expression is when you have in a body reached a state called samadhi.
Yeah.
Which is the highest level you can use. It's that place or level of consciousness called turiya, and it's above all the rest. And then if you get absorbed into it, that's when you know who you really are. This state comes from most of us not in one lifetime. According to Patanjali's yoga aphorisms, to become one-pointed, that ekagrata stage is a difficult stage to reach only because we have materialized ourselves. But if you continuously are trying, then the writings say eventually that buddhi-manasic essence comes to your aid. A student who passed away used to have this expression. He used to say, the thief is taken to heaven. The thief, being the lower mind, is pulled up to heaven, in other words. By its own energy, it cannot do it. It has to be the higher mind helping you, pulling you up, because you're aligned with it. Any other way, it cannot happen.
But unless it tries, won't.
It will never happen if you don't try. Mr. Judge has an article called Culture of Concentration. Because in this, concentration comes first, contemplation comes next, and only then are we ready to do meditation. It has 3 steps. In it, Mr. Judge says, by this process only will you be able to separate your astral body from your physical body. However that plays a role, this student does not know, but he says it is a very important part of it, that most ordinary human beings are enmeshed with the astral body. In other words, it's intertwined in your cellular and molecular constitution, and you need to separate it. Only sitting and trying to imbibe your soul through the meditative process are you enabling that to happen. And you can find that online. It has 2 sections. Culture of Concentration by Mr. Judge. It's a very important one. It also helps you understand the astral body and emotions. Emotions play a tremendous part in meditation because it pulls your attention to the passions and desires principles, and those abide in the astral body, not in the physical, the astral.
So I have several other questions, but maybe I will ask them during the round table.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we got afternoon
Yeah,
meeting.
if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer it.
or
Yeah,
later?
now,
Uh-huh.
ask it now.
Okay,
We
so
can-
just,
Should I? Okay.
Thank you.
so the